Well, good morning to you all. I am Amy Jacobs, and I serve two roles here this morning. I am the Commissioner of the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning, which is the state's birth through 5 early learning agency. For those of you that don't know, we're probably best known for Georgia's pre-K program, but we serve child care providers in the workforce and families and children birth through 5. I'm also honored to be the chair of the board of the Sandra Deal Center for Early Language and Literacy. So my role here this morning is twofold. First, on behalf of the board, I welcome you to this year's Governor's Summit on Early Language and Literacy, and want to take a minute just to recognize some of our special local representatives. Representative Rick Williams is here with us this morning. Our county commission. County Commissioners Henry Craig and Johnny Westmoreland, thank you for being here this morning. Our school board members, Lynn Chandler and John Jackson. And then, of course, the fantastic Baldwin County School Superintendent, Dr. Norris Price. So thank you so much for being here and joining us this morning for the second day of our summit. So for those of you who were here yesterday, welcome back. For those of you who are joining us today for the first time, we are glad you are here. I assure you that you will find the content of today's agenda impactful and powerful, and we will all leave here more committed than ever to our cause. We will be inspired while also discussing practical, applicable ways to support the development of early language and literacy for Georgia students from birth to age 8. My second responsibility this morning is a little bittersweet for me. Sweet because I have the honor of introducing two people for whom I have the utmost appreciation and respect, and who are the reason we are here today, Governor Nathan Deal and First Lady Sandra Deal. It's also bitter because this is the final summit on early language and literacy of Governor Deal's administration. It's safe to say that most of our state's governors have made education a part of their platforms, but I honestly don't remember any recent governor who specifically highlighted literacy as a focus of their administration in the way that Governor and Mrs. Deal have. The Deals have helped elevate literacy as an issue in the minds of the public and policymakers. I don't know if you noticed how before the recent primary, all candidates on both sides of the aisle specifically mentioned literacy and the importance of reading as they campaigned. I attribute this important awareness to the governor and the First Lady. During their 8 years in office, Mrs. Deal has driven thousands of miles to read in hundreds of classrooms to thousands of Georgia students, much of that during her Read Across Georgia campaign in March of each year. She has also been an advocate of literacy as she has spoken to civic groups, professional organizations, parents, and teacher associations. Governor Deal has accompanied the First Lady on many of her visits and has also supported the Get Georgia Reading campaign to help ensure that Georgia's children are reading on grade level by the end of 3rd grade. He has also championed the legislation that created this summit's host, the Sandra Deal Center for Early Language and Literacy. This unique, one-of-a-kind center is a resource to help equip early childhood educators, whether in child care programs or in public schools, to enhance early language and literacy skills in children from birth to age 8. As the Deals leave office at the beginning of next year, they will have many worthwhile accomplishments in which they can take pride. But in my opinion, one of their lasting legacies will be the creation of this center and the energy and resources they have expended to ensure that Georgia's children learn to read so they can read to learn. Now, if you will help me welcome Georgia's literacy leader, Governor Nathan Deal.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you for taking time this morning to be with us. I have a prepared presentation that my staff suggested. I'm not very good at following their suggestions sometimes. and today is one of those occasions. I want to be a little bit philosophical and a little bit practical with you in my remarks, but I really want you to hear from my wife, Sandra. She is the hardest working, unpaid employee of the state of Georgia, and she reminds me of that from time to time. If you read the educational journals, if you read the media's accounts of the way states are doing, and we have been ranked very well. We are proud of our #1 ranking for 5 consecutive years by Site Selection magazine as being the best state in which to do business. But all of these analyses, if you read the fine print, will tell you that for sustained economic growth and job growth, it depends on an educated and qualified workforce. Now, we've done a lot to try to make sure we meet that criteria. And obviously, by our ranking, in many respects, we have done very well. We spent a lot of effort and attention to making sure that the skill levels of our potential employees is up to date. We have, in fact, created over the last several years some 17 categories that are categories where jobs currently exist, and many of these existed even during the height of the Great Recession when there were people in thousands of numbers who were out of work, even in the midst of that. And that's when I asked that question, even in the midst of high unemployment, do we still have jobs available in Georgia that Georgians are not qualified to take? And the answer came back a resounding yes. And I said, well, you know, that's a pretty good place to start. Instead of trying to recruit businesses and companies and people from other states to come and fill jobs, why not try to get our own people qualified to take the jobs that are already here? So out of that grew what we now call the Hope Career Grant for our technical colleges. 17 different categories where the state will pay through the Hope Grant program 100% of their educational tuition cost to get certification or degrees in one of those 17 areas. Now, we have done a survey of how successful that approach has been. The latest statistics indicate that for individuals who take us up on those offers and study in one of those 17 areas, there is a 99.2% employment rate that comes to them. Now, have you ever heard of any employment program or training program that has that kind of statistical success? I have not. I have never heard of one that comes even close. Obviously, we have continued to concentrate on our higher education at our college and university level, and we are seeing great success there. More and more students are beginning to focus in on that higher education because we've done some things even within our high school environment in which we see dual enrollment being a success that continues to expand every year as parents understand that we can take advantage of the state paying the tuition cost for our junior or our senior in high school to take college courses, get credit for it toward their high school diploma, and get credit for it towards a certificate or degree in the higher education institution that they're attending. I say all of that to say we have done a lot. And this institution here, Georgia College and State University, Sandra was a graduate of here, but you know, it's changed names about 3 or 4 times since she was here. It was an all-woman school at that time. You ought to try coming here and dating in an all-woman's school. That's quite an experience. You have very restricted areas that you can go to. But anyway, that being the case, what I'm saying is we have made very extensive efforts to make sure that young people who are getting through our high school programs are given the opportunity to further their education, to focus their skills, and to therefore be able to get a job. However, it is easy to overlook the fact that they will not be able to go to a technical school or a college or a university unless they fulfill their requirements in the elementary and middle school and high school areas to make themselves eligible for these higher levels of concentrated learning. There are a lot of sociologists and would-be educators who pontificate from time to time about what is going on in education. The central factor that I believe is the most important of all is what we're here to talk about today, and that is literacy. Last night, Sandra insisted that I accompany her to a program in Gainesville. I was tired out by the time I got through with yesterday. 25th anniversary of the Hope program was celebrated yesterday. We had a lot of things. I took pictures all day long, but we took off last evening to go to Gainesville to our church, First Baptist Church, and their center, much like this, in which they were celebrating the fact of a literacy garden that had been established on property that is right adjacent to our county school superintendent's office building. I'm sure your county school superintendent may be familiar with this. A couple in our church and good friends of ours, Kathy and Lee Lovett, took this on as a project several years ago, and it has become a huge success. Well, the guest speaker for the event last night was Carmen Deedy. I see heads nodding. You know who she is. Very interesting lady. She and Sandra have become very good friends. She was a Cuban refugee as a result of the Cuban Revolution many, many years ago. And she told some interesting stories about her background. She told about her father, who did not like going to school and decided that at 6 years of age, he could make his day more worthwhile by skipping school, going down by the river and lying on the banks of the river and just having a good time, and then going back and making sure that he didn't get caught in the process. However, he got caught, and his mother gave him the choice. You can either work on the farm or you can go to school. Well, he didn't like school. He didn't like his teacher. In fact, he said he would hide in the bushes, and when his teacher would come walking by while he was down there by the riverbank, he'd throw rocks at him. But anyway, he made the decision he was not going to go back to school. So therefore, he was illiterate. A very complicated story that she tells about he wanted to read the comics in the newspaper, and how the baker, who he went to his shop every morning, finally, he was a gruff old guy, but finally he said, here you are, you're 14 years old, and you don't know how to read. And because he was interested in reading those comic strips in the newspaper, which she said they had just recently had in the Cuban newspapers at that time, he learned to read as a result of that. And it was transformational, not only for him, but of course for her and the rest of the members of her family. She understands the importance of literacy from a personal background with her father, and she has written many children's books. Is that one of hers there today, or? Oh yeah, that's Malcolm Mitchell's book, isn't it? Is that it? Yeah, okay. Well, Malcolm, of course, in addition to being a great football player, has taken up the art of writing children's books, which is good for him. I'm proud of him. But she has been an author that has had an influence on a lot of people. In fact, she apparently had an influence on our pastor, who was introducing everybody last night, and he even quoted from one of her children's books. He said it's two of the most profound statements that he's ever read in any book, and he quoted those. But what I'm getting at is this. Many people just overlook the simple fact that if you cannot read, you are a prisoner in a world. She put it this way. She said, my father came to realize that he could understand what people were saying because he could hear it, but he could not read, so therefore he could not know what other people's ideas were, and he could not expand his own intellectual knowledge if he could not read. Now, many people have never come to such an epiphany as to how important reading really is to their lives, to their future, to their family's future. We've spent a lot of time and effort and money trying to figure out a way to bring chronically failing schools up to par. It is a tough undertaking, but I feel certain that if you analyze the statistics and talk to the people involved, if you really bore down deep, it's the fact that children did not learn to read proficiently at an age in their life when they should have learned that skill. They may have been able to bluff their way through a few grades, and it never caught up with them sufficiently. But when it gets to the level where it does catch up with them, they become desperate. And what happens is they drop out of school. Now, the statistics are not lying when they say that if you drop out of and do not have a high school education, your chances of winding up in prison, if you're a male in particular, and if you're a female, the chances of having children out of wedlock and being dependent for the rest of your life on our welfare programs, that is true as well. So, for all of these people who are saying, and I've worked very hard and we've had great success in our prison reform effort. That's people who've already gotten in trouble and are in prison. And one of the most successful parts of that is the statistic that I uncovered when I asked the question, what is the most common characteristic of people who are in our state prison system? And the answer came back, they dropped out of high school. They don't have a high school diploma, don't have a GED. Therefore, they don't have any skills, they don't have any marketable opportunity for a job when they are released from prison. And we've made huge strides and huge efforts to go back and educate people who are now at least 17 and above who are in our prison system and give them the skills that they should have acquired when they were 6, 7, and 8 years old. That's harder to do, but many of these people have finally come to the realization that without that skill, they will never be successful when they are released from prison. First of all, because they won't get a good job. They will not be able to advance their career. So I have been very, very pleased and humbled by the opportunity that our people working within our correctional system are giving, and they're embracing it to provide educational opportunities for those in our prison system. However, it will be a whole lot less painful and a whole lot more efficient if we could have given them those skills before they got in trouble. It's a shame that you have to wind up in prison before you realize how important your ability to read really is, and then get serious about correcting that deficiency. But that's life. That's the way it is. So, it is groups like yours, individuals like you, teachers in particular, who take the time, make the effort to insist that children learn to read. Now, I know, since both of my parents were educators in the Georgia public school system, since both of Sandra's parents were educators in the Georgia public school system, and since she was both an elementary and a middle school teacher in the public school system, I know that there is a lot of pressure on teachers, on certain administrators to say, well, we just cannot have this many children that are held back. That's what we used to call it, being held back. So the proverbial social promotion occurs. They are old enough to be promoted. They're certainly, in many cases, large enough to be promoted. And if they're not promoted, they're certainly going to stick out in a class of younger and smaller children. And of course, you don't want to lose whatever self-worth that they might have. But nonetheless, if they're not given the skills that they lack, social promotion can turn out to be the worst thing that you can do for them, because they move through the system to a point where they become embarrassed to admit their lack of reading skills, and therefore that embarrassment actually is the roadblock that keeps them from being able to do something different. Now, we've seen a number of experiments in various schools that are innovative schools in our state of combined classrooms. Children that lack that reading skill but are proficient in the math arena and other skill sets of other subject matters, of being able to combine them, allow them to catch up on the areas of their deficiency, especially if it's reading, and then catch up overall with their classmates so that by the time they get to high school, they are not considered to be behind or have been overlooked or not promoted. Those are the kinds of activities I think we're all going to have to explore more thoroughly in our school systems. Parents don't like the idea that you're going to hold my child back. Well, yeah, you didn't read to your child, ma'am, sir. If you had been doing your part at home, teachers can't tell them that. I know that. But the truth is, many times if parents had done what they should have done themselves, the children would not have these deficiencies. But the reality is, many of them do not know how to do it. And the longer we wait to resolve this issue, the more generational the problem becomes. So, how is a mother who does not have adequate reading skills herself help her 7-year-old learn how to read proficiently? Becomes very tough for both of them. Now, I told you that my wife was a public school teacher. When our first children, we had two very close together, our first two, and then we skipped about 7 years and we had two more that were very close together later on. But at the time that our oldest child, who's our only son, about the time he was, I guess, in first grade, Sandra realized he doesn't know how to read. He does not know how to read. Now, he was one of those children that loved television. He could not wait as a little toddler for his television programs to come on. He had one that he called Bumahalter. It was Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom is what it was. He called it Mutual of Omaha. He loved that program. And his mind could absorb what he saw and what he heard. But his mind did not want to slow down enough to read those words on a piece of paper. In fact, he was so bad that in first grade, he had another friend who also had the first name of Jason, which was his. And so the teacher said, I need you to write your names on your papers when you turn them in so that I'll know whose paper it is. Well, instead of writing Jason on it, he would only put an N. And so Sandra asked him, said, well, why don't you put your name on there because you got another Jason? He said, well, they know who it is. I just put an N. Well, I don't know what the N stood for, but it was the end of Jason, I suppose. But he was that bad off. He did not want to learn to read. He did not want to learn to write proficiently. So, about that same point in time, we were recovering from our exit from the United States Army and back in the law practice for me, and she'd been teaching school, and I persuaded her to stay at home with our children, and we built a new house out in the country. Well, I was looking forward to my new house. Now, out in the country, just like we are now, you have to depend on satellite television to get television reception. I was looking forward to getting that new satellite antenna put up in my new television in my new house. Well, Sandra said, we're not doing that. I said, what do you mean we're not doing that? She said, we're not doing that till Jason learns to read. She went back to college, took classes in how to teach reading, even though she had gotten a degree in elementary education. She said, I still don't have the skill set that I think I need. She went back and got additional training. You came here, did you not? Sarah Hawthorne, who's in the back, who's a longtime friend of ours, taught her how to teach reading. So she comes back home and she's going to teach our son how to read. Well, he still rather watch television, but there wasn't any television to watch. So Jason and I suffered for about 7.5 months with no television. Now, I know what he gained from it. He gained the ability to read. I'm still trying to figure out what I gained from it. Because my habit was not totally broken by that experience. But those are the kinds of disciplines that it is very hard to come by. It requires parents who are totally dedicated to the skill sets of their children. And many children, Sandra has concluded, and I'm taking probably all of her speaking time, but she says, I think that's what happens to so many children. Their minds are working faster because they live in an age now, they live in an age of those digital devices that they're playing with all the time. And their minds are moving much faster than slowing down and pronouncing words and making sense out of a string of words called a sentence. I think that is a very true statement. So we've got work to do. What my challenge to you is, understand that what you're doing in literacy is the foundation stone upon which all other education has to be built. It is like the house built on the rocks as opposed to a house built on sand. It's built on sand that does not include a foundation of literacy, then the house cannot stand. It will ultimately collapse because the demands of the world will put pressure that the child cannot handle. So, I thank you for what you do. She is going to speak to you now, and if I have not used all of her subject matter and all of her time, I hope you will welcome the First Lady of the state of Georgia, my wife now for 52 years. We celebrated back in June, Sandra Deal.
Well, thank you all. It's always so fun to come back to Milledgeville. I just loved it from the day I drove up on this campus and got off of a Greyhound bus or Trailways. I can't remember which bus I rode, but it was wonderful to come here, and I wanted to be a student here the first time I saw the campus. And so I've always loved it, and so it's always a joy to get to come back. But I'm especially grateful to all of you who are here also, because I know some of you have come from a far place, all over Georgia, to support reading and to learn more about how to go about it. Now, I can't claim, I was totally surprised when they named the building after me, because I was not a preschool teacher. I was not I taught third grade one year, and I said, deliver me up. And so I had absolutely no idea that they would name a building after me, because I was not the proficient teacher for that. So many of you are. What I did know was the experience I had with Jason, which pointed to me how important it was for children to learn early. But what really drove it home was when I taught 6th grade, which I dearly loved. Those children who couldn't read faked it. They would read along and they would see the first letter or two on a word and they would just call it anything that didn't make a bit of sense. And I thought, these children do not know how to read. They don't understand that the sentence should make sense. And if they're reading silently and the sentence doesn't make sense, they learn nothing. And so that bothered me. And I did a lot of talking to them and reading to them myself and encouraging them. But you could see them withdraw when things got tight, when they didn't know how to do things. And for a lot of them, we could improve some things, but by the time you get to 6th grade, it's hard to slow that mind down to teach them those skills. And you don't have that much time when you're changing classes and teaching several groups of students. And so, when I became First Lady, and they said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know, but I'm not going to sit here and drink tea and read magazines, that's for sure. And I don't like to plan menus and parties. I'll let somebody else plan the menus. I don't want to do tasting parties and things like that." I said, "I'm going to go read to children." And so I started that just because I wanted them to enjoy reading and sort of empower themselves. I mean, they had to want to learn to read, because I knew from Jason's situation, if they didn't want to learn to read, they wouldn't. They would close their minds and they wouldn't read. And so what I would read to children, when I would read to children, I would talk to them about what they wanted to be and why they needed to read and how important reading was for their future, to get them to plan for their future. And we would talk about, what do you want to be when you grow up, or who do you want to be? And they would say a fireman or a policeman or a teacher and we talked about the different things. One of the heartbreaking things for me was I'd read to a four-year-old class, and as I went around asking them what they'd like to be when they grew up, a little girl said, "I want to be a hoe." And I said, "I'm sorry?" She said, "I want to be a hoe." And I said, "Well, maybe you will be." I didn't know what to say. But I thought, can't we give our children hope and ambitions and things? I'm sure she had seen people dressed up really pretty. And somebody had said, "Well, our thing at home was one of our," I'm talking double, but she had probably seen somebody dressed up, and somebody had made the comment, "You look like a hoe," or maybe maybe that went on in her family. I'm not sure, but it broke my heart that was her ambition. But the thing, a family thing that went on with us is when our middle daughter, who was, I think, going to 6th or 7th grade, the first dance or something that she went to, that she had one of those little stretchy type dresses. This was years ago. And she wore it, and she put on makeup and curled her hair and had on little heels that were about that high. And our younger daughter walked in and she said, "Mama, she looks like a Protestant." She was incensed that she was so dressed up, and she'd just gotten the wrong word. But, we do think, I thought about that when that child said that. But we want to give our children ambitions and a desire to read and why they need to know how to read. And so that was basically what I spent my time doing, is just reading to children to show them what joy you could find in reading, and to want to learn to read. And I would tell them, your teacher would like to bore a hole in your head and pour this in and just seal it up, but it doesn't work that way. You've got to open your mind and you've got to do the work. Reading is work. Learning to read is work, but that's your job when you go to school. But then more and more we decided and learned from the studies that we needed to have the children talked to. It never occurred to me parents didn't talk to their children, because we talked to ours all the time. And we talked to them about feeding them every time. You know, even as babies we talked to them. And we talked to them as we'd feed them, you know, spoon, cereal, peaches, whatever we were feeding. And they learned to talk. And all of my children talked. It never occurred to me that parents didn't talk to their children. But we learned that that was such an important part of it. And read, of course, I assumed everybody read to their children, but not everybody read to their children. I read to Jason. I just read to him so much. And we talked about things so much, I never taught him to read. And so that threw his life into quite a cycle that he had to overcome. Thank goodness, with the help of his good teachers and no television and a lot of hard work, he did become a good reader and did become a Superior Court judge, which he could not have done had he not attained that skill of reading. And that's what I want for every child. And I'm so thankful that we have a facility that is training our teachers and trying to help our teachers find ways to discover what's wrong that is the block for the child. Because just calling the words is not the answer. They have to understand what the words mean. So there has to be discussion. There has to be talking. And I think for a lot of children, it's just learning the actual skill of calling those words without the comprehension. That's what I ran into with a lot of the sixth graders too. When they get there, they've almost given up. And so I'm just so thrilled to have Theresa heading up our Dunnigan Deal Center over there. And I do have to tell you, both my mother and Nathan's mother, they started teaching early when you only had to have 2 years. Of course, my mama came here to get her 2 years. Nathan's mama came here for a year, I think, or so. But they both came back here to finish their 4-year degree. Actually, my mama finished her 4-year degree as I enrolled. So she was finishing in the summer as I was coming to college because she needed a job to pay my college. And so she had to go back to work, and she finished her 4-year degree, which was great. Now we have master's degrees and doctorate degrees and so many things that improve our knowledge. But we also have to encourage our young people to want to be teachers. We can't talk about how bad it is being teachers. We all struggle, and we all have days where we're ready to pull our hair out, but we have to encourage our young people because we need them to be the teachers. We need those people who really love school and love children and love teaching to want to teach, just like we need them to want to learn how to read. And so I would encourage you to be good ambassadors to our older children who are looking at their future and planning for the future, but also encourage our parents to read to their children. I just tell everybody, jump on wherever it fits. All of us are talented in certain ways. I was not the skilled teacher as far as teaching the little ones. I didn't manage the little ones real well. Those reading groups drove me nuts. I couldn't concentrate on the group I was working with because somebody over there was doing something they weren't supposed to. And it interrupted all of it. And I thought, this is not what I need to be doing. I need to be working with older children, and I moved up. that was the right decision for me. But I can still read to little children and bring them into the desire to learn to read. That's what we do. We, each of us, find our skill set and where we can be most useful, most beneficial to the teaching profession, and we teach. And so I thank all of you for searching for your niche and for serving in whatever way you serve. And if you find out it doesn't fit, move on to something else. So where you can really contribute, because it's important. We're only on this earth so long, and we have to make our time count. And so I thank all of you for making your time count and for coming today and for listening to me and to Nathan. I appreciate it. You won't have to listen to us next year. You'll get somebody else if you vote. Thank you.
I'm going to keep this very short. We have a wonderful guest with us today. Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Mrs. Deal, for your being champions for us in Georgia. We all need someone who tells us and reassures us that the impossible is possible. And I believe that is the highest tribute you can give someone. That's someone who has told and reassured the nation that the impossible is indeed possible, describes our next speaker, Ralph Smith, Managing Director of the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Please join me in welcoming Ralph Smith.
Good morning. I am delighted to be here, but let me begin by telling you that my grandmother used to have a phrase, spoiled, that you're spoiled, you know? And that really was high praise for somebody. And I think you folks in Georgia are spoiled because I can think of no other state where you could sit in a room like this and hear a governor and a first lady speak so knowledgeably and passionately about this set of issues. And I want to just say thank you. And you know that I'm here this morning to say thank you to Georgia as a whole. But what you may not know, and Governor, I'm going to ask your permission, and I know I will have it, is a year ago, we decided that it was important to look around the country and identify the people who are doing the most, the best work, who were providing leadership and guidance and vision and insight and inspiration. This year, there are 130 of those folks identified. Last year, there were 6. And of the 6, there was 1 First Lady. And the First Lady of Georgia could not get to Denver last year to be recognized as a champion for grade level reading. So if the First Lady couldn't get to Denver, I decided I would come to Georgia. And so the first order of business today, Mrs. Deal, is to ask you to come up and accept the recognition as a national champion for grade level reading and being a charter member of the Council of Champions for grade level reading. And while the First Lady is here, I'm going to ask Ariane is not only this brilliant leader, but one of the things I love about her is she's so much younger than I am. It's that when they give us a citation that I would have to take off my glasses and put them back on, I'd said to her this morning, I need you up there with me to make sure you can read this, please.
So I put my glasses on. Sandra Deal has served as Georgia's First Lady since 2011, when her husband, Governor Nathan Deal, was elected to the first of 2 terms as the state's chief executive. Georgia campaigned in support of the state's, as First Lady, she launched the Read Across Georgia campaign in support of the state's efforts to assure early literacy and 3rd grade reading success. As of mid-2018, the First Lady has traveled to every county in the state, visiting more than 500 schools in 181 school districts. First Lady Deal also helps lead the Get Georgia Reading campaign, which has been honored by the Campaign for Grade Level Reading as one of the nation's most powerful statewide 3rd grade reading mobilization efforts. Since it was launched in 2014, Get Georgia Reading has sponsored 74 local grade level reading campaigns in 68 counties. In addition, her leadership of the Georgia Children's Cabinet and the Georgia Literacy Commission has helped to drive coordination of the state's civic, philanthropic, education, and business sectors in early grade success, adult literacy, juvenile justice, and child welfare initiatives. First Lady Deal's unwavering commitment to literacy and education not only united Georgia around a common agenda, but also raised Georgia up as an exemplar of what well-led and highly mobilized communities can do to put children on the path to success in school and life. For these contributions, the Campaign for Grade Level Reading is honored to recognize First Lady Sandra Deal as a grade level reading champion. Ralph Smith, Managing Director.
That was not on the official program, but I know that the governor would grant me permission to deviate from the official program. Literally, there's only one First Lady, and I think, Ariane, am I recalling correct that of the 100+ people this year, the First Lady of Georgia remains the only First Lady on the whole list? Yes. You have been an amazing inspiration to all of us. And so has this state. You know, I travel around a lot, and you get to a lot of communities, and you don't go to communities and say bad things about the community. You go to communities and say good things about the community and state. I asked to come to Georgia. And when you travel as much as I do, asking to take on an assignment scares the heck out of everybody. They say, well, why do you want to do that? I wanted to come here publicly to acknowledge the work of Ariane Weldon. Ariane has brought more energy, more vision, and a deeper commitment to this work than practically anybody else around the country. We used to have somebody we called the Energizer Buddy. She lost that title when we met Ariane. Her capacity to consume voluminous research and to reduce that research to practical recommendations that are capable of implementation, both in terms of practice and policy, is second to none. And here in Georgia, you are very fortunate to have her. And I only regret that her commitment to Georgia is so deep and so strong that despite many efforts, I've been unable to steal her. So let me ask that you join me in thanking Ariane Weldon for her leadership here. The official reason I'm here. We are not a grant-making organization. We have asked and encouraged 300 communities in 43 states, District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and the United States Virgin Islands to join the campaign for grade level reading. And that would be bragging if we planned it. This is a total surprise to us. If somebody had said to us in 2012 that there'd be well over 60 communities in the state of Georgia who would be in the grade level reading campaign, I would have bet against it, not for it. What has happened over the last several years for the campaign has been remarkable. And it's all the more remarkable because it's been driven by folks in local communities and states who have put a stake in the ground and said that our children will learn to read proficiently, folks who understand that reading is a gateway skill, who understand that that fourth grader who is unable to read has no interest in paying attention, no interest in avoiding oppositional behavior, no trust in the adults who've allowed him or her to get into that position, and no faith that there's any cavalry coming to save them. They know that they're in serious trouble. On the other hand, those children who learn to read become our biggest allies in their own development. They become agents of their own learning. They become advocates of their own interests. They become authors of their own future. That is something that, as I listen to the governor here, he understands deeply and with his leadership has managed to corral and to inspire leaders all over this state to rally and decide that in Georgia, children will learn to read proficiently and beyond. Your Get Georgia Reading campaign has been leading the rest of us in so many ways. Before Georgia, none of us ever used the term language nutrition. And had we used it, we wouldn't have a clue as to what it means. Before Georgia, Talk With Me, Baby was not on the screen of anybody but a few small organizations. Now it's on the screen of practically every state in the country, with about a dozen of them seriously trying to implement it. Before Georgia, there were aspirations for cross-training of the professionals who come in contact with families, but few thought it could be done, that it could be done well, and it could be done well at scale. Georgia, Get Georgia Reading proved that it was possible. As we look across the country, we have identified some success factors. And while these success factors are variously distributed across many states and jurisdictions, in Georgia we find them all. We find that there's a set of goals that are ambitious, that are achievable, and they're actionable. We find that there's shared ownership and joint accountability. We find that the plans and efforts are research-based and data-driven. We find that there's attention to those who would normally fall off the edge and who would be considered the acceptable casualties of the appropriate statistic. We find the kind of leadership in the private sector, leadership in the philanthropic sector, and especially leadership in the public sector and leadership from the very top. You know, in these days of social media, when there are tweets going out, you're very careful not to exaggerate because somebody will tweet this and I will have the governor of some state say, wait a minute. But I will tell you that having met a number of the governors and seen the extraordinary leadership so many governors have provided, no governor has done a better job of giving voice and leadership to a state-level campaign. At no other state do we find the depth and breadth of agency involvement and commitment to literacy. That is why we are delighted to have this opportunity, to have me here in Georgia to say to you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we are delighted that Georgia is once again recognized as a pace setter state for the National Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And I'm going to ask Ariane to read the certificate. Ariane?
The Campaign for Grade Level Reading honors Georgia as a state pace setter for launching the campaign in 2014, an extraordinary statewide public-private collaboration working to improve language and literacy outcomes for children birth through third grade and for the promise of bigger outcomes and sustainable scale, reflected in strong commitment from elected officials to the goal of all Georgia children reading proficiently by the end of third grade, a research-based common agenda comprised of 4 pillars: language, nutrition, access, positive learning climate, and teacher preparation and effectiveness. Strong leadership by a cabinet of high-level executive leaders from 26 public and private statewide entities, and the engagement of more than 100 partner organizations and significant public and philanthropic investments. A strong focus on coordinating and implementing population-focused policies and systems changes necessary to move the needle and close the gap. A strategic focus on building local capacity with 74 grade-level reading communities in 68 counties, and systemic incentives for additional communities to launch grade-level reading campaigns. The development and scaling of Talk With Me Baby, which has trained more than 2,400 healthcare workers, infant, toddler teachers, child welfare staff, and foster parents, and is being integrated into nursing preparation programs in the Technical College System of Georgia this fall. And adoption of several Medicaid policy changes, adding schools as sites for delivery of telemedicine services, including primary care, speech-language therapy, and mental health services. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading is grateful to Georgia for its exemplary contribution to this important work.
Governor, please, would you join us?
I know I've already had my say, but I've got just a couple of things I want to add. First of all, I want to update the statistics. Sandra actually read in over 830 individual schools until a little bout with cancer slowed her down the end of the school year this past year. But I guarantee you now that she is recovered, the coming of school, this opening of this fall, she's going to be back on the trail. So hopefully she will come to one of the schools where you work or close to you, and I would appreciate it if you would greet her warmly. The second thing I want to say to you is this. She and I, as she indicated, we're not going to be here this time next year. We're leaving at the end of this year. But there are some things that still remain to be done. And it's going to require vigilance from all of you with the next governor and whoever is the part of the next administration to not let this issue die. I want to suggest one thing to you, if you can have any influence on the media, is this. Now, for those of us who are in the greater Atlanta area and get most of our news through the local news channels from our television stations in Atlanta, you cannot watch a single news broadcast any day without multiple events of shootings, of murders, of carjackings, of robberies, and many times even the newscast acknowledges that these are young perpetrators of these crimes. Now, that's informational, but it doesn't help us solve the underlying problem. If my statistic of 70% of those who are in prison dropped out of high school, I presume the same statistic would apply to those who are being arrested for the ongoing crimes in our state. Wouldn't it be nice if the news media took the initiative to give a report as to this 16-year-old, this 17-year-old, this 18-year-old is a high school dropout? Nobody knows that, but I'm guaranteeing you that in almost every case that is true. Now, what is the reason for saying that? The reason for saying that is you can't undo the crime they've committed, but you can begin to ask the questions, what allowed this student to drop out of school? Where was the breakdown? Because if the breakdown is not addressed, there will be others who will follow in those same footsteps. So we have to be vigilant if we really want to change the dynamics of this. Last comment. When I was running for governor in 2010, our oldest daughter, who was a psychology major, and I said, what in the world are you going to do? What kind of job are you going to get with that? Well, she wound up working with Family Connection and DFACS. And she told me, she said, Daddy, you know, they are saying that you can predict how many prison beds you're going to need based on the reading scores of third graders. That sort of sunk in my mind. You know, we have not solved the whole problem, and they told me that translates into the fact that in your first 4-year term, you're going to have to build 2 new adult prisons at the cost of about $264 million. We did not have to build new prisons. We actually downsized and repurposed some of the prisons. Our incarceration rate is dropping. I don't think that's had a whole lot to do with our reading campaigns, but I guarantee you that in future years, as those who would be high school dropouts don't do so because they have overcome their deficiency of lack of reading skills, we will see crime rates continue to drop because it is a primary factor in that very difficult and very costly part of our society. So if you want your society and your town and your community to be safer, it behooves you to make sure that your children are learning to read on grade level and that they're graduating from high school. Statistically, your community will be very much better off. Thank you all for this honor. I appreciate it. Sandra and I are delighted to be with you today. Y'all keep up the good work. Thank you. And I want to join with the congratulations that Ariane has already received. She does do a great job, and I thank you. Thank you very much.
Let me, Ariane will tell you that people who know me know that when I say thank you, it's heartfelt in terms of what you've done, but it's equally heartfelt in terms of what I hope you're going to do. And my thanks to Georgia for having played such a pivotal role in the campaign so far comes with the encouragement and expectation to continue to play that same role in the campaign in the future. And if you're going to do that, I think it's incumbent on us to heed the admonition of Governor Deal and the First Lady to be vigilant about what comes next, to understand that there are a large and growing number of children who are falling beyond the reach of schools, and these are the kids who start school so far behind it's difficult for them to catch up, the kids who miss so many days of school that it doesn't matter if we have quality teaching with a rigorous curriculum and high standards, because they're not there to benefit from it, and the kids for whom summer is more risk than it is opportunity. And these kids are the same kids. The same kid who starts out far behind and therefore needs the most school is a kid who ends up getting the least because they're chronically absent. And these are the kids who are most at risk over the summer. And so if we're going to actually get kids to that level of reading and literacy proficiency that is within our aspiration, we're going to have to start early, go deep, really pay attention to the whole family. We're going to have to be able to ask ourselves unflinchingly what is emerging to be the tough question. And here's a question that we've put to communities around the country. How confident are you that in your community and your state, that low-income children have access to the services for which they're eligible and they need access, are getting those services and supports in the proper sequence and at the appropriate dosage and duration? I want to tell you that there is not a single community today that has answered that question. We've got a whole lot of confidence. In fact, virtually everybody says little or no confidence. I want you to aspire to make sure that in the coming years, that here in Georgia, you can say affirmatively, not only are we taking good care of those kids who are at risk of falling beyond the reach of schools, but we have a high degree of confidence that those children have access to the services and supports that they need and for which they're eligible, that those services and supports are being delivered in the correct sequence and at the appropriate dosage and duration. Because if you can answer yes to that question, then you've met the governor's challenge. And lastly, to the First Lady, I want to go back to a book from 30 years ago, There Are No Children Here. And they made a movie of that book, and they went back to that public housing development in Chicago and interviewed children who lived in that public housing development. And the last interview was of a kid who was about 12. And they asked her what she'd like to do in the future. And she said, "The future?" And she paused. She paused again. And then she says, "I can't imagine the future." We live in the richest nation in the history of the world, and we have children who expect their funerals, who may see themselves as hoes, but can't think of a future. What we know is literacy is a way for us and for all of us to be transported from the life we have into the life to which we might aspire. Many of us traveled the galaxy because we were able to read. We went to communities in which some of us now live, but we only imagine. Literacy is the gateway, and if we're going to change the future of those kids, of our kids, we have got to make sure that they have that set of skills, that gateway skill that allows them to be an agent of their own learning, an architect, an advocate, and an author of their own future. And that, I hope, is the challenge you take away today, a challenge that comes with the grateful appreciation of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you so much.